good morning, my young ladies. I am so happy that all of you are present today. Now tell me, what did you do to come to college today? What did you do in the morning as soon as you got up? What are the different activities you did to come to college?
Look at the watch as to what time it is.
Okay, and then?
Switch off the alarm.
Switch off the alarm, and then what did you do?
Get ready.
You got ready. How do you get ready?
Okay, I had a wash and then...
Very good. You had a wash, you brushed your teeth, you combed your hair. Now, did you know all these things when you were born? You didn't. You learned these things. So today, our topic we are going to discuss in the classroom is learning. Now, what is learning? It is a relatively permanent change. It is not temporary. It is not due to illness. It's not due to drugs. It's not due to because I'm very tired, so there's a change in my behavior. Oh no, it's something that is permanent change, and the change is present in your behavior as well as in your knowledge. Imagine me coming today to class and even teaching you from the very beginning A, B, C. No, you have learnt all this and it is stored somewhere. So learning is a relatively permanent change, a change in behavior, a change in knowledge, and it is a result of experience. You have learned so many things in the past few days. You are learning because of experience, because of what all has happened in your past. Now, learning is not a result of maturation. What is maturation?
Maturation is the unfolding of genetic traits.
Very good. Yeah. What is maturation? It is the unfolding of genetic traits. You were a baby, you were helpless. And then you learned how to hold your head. And then you gradually started holding your head. You started creeping, you started crawling, you started sitting. You didn't actually have to learn it. It was there, present in your genes, and then you learn to take the first step, then you learn to take another step, and finally you're able to run, dance, jump, and do a lot of lovely things. So learning is different, maturation is different. Learning plays such an important role in our lives that it is the key process in human behavior. It plays an important role in anything and everything that we do. Even right now, you're writing something, it's because of learning. You're looking at me, it's because of learning. You have learned to dress up, you have had your hairstyle, you plaited your hair this morning. All this is a result of learning. Now, the first type of learning we are going to learn today is classical conditioning. What is classical conditioning? Who is the first person who spoke about classical conditioning? It was Ivan P. Pavlov in the year 1849. Between the year 1849 and 1936, was a Russian physiologist who won a Nobel Prize in 1904. He conducted an experiment on the digestive system of dogs. You can see on the screen a picture of the dog, and now you find that the dog is placed in a certain apparatus because he was measuring the drops of saliva of the dog. And one day, Ivan Pavlov noticed something different. He found that the dog was salivating even before he put food in the dog's mouth. The dog was salivating at the sound of the footsteps of the caretaker. He was also salivating when he saw the caretaker, and he said, something is happening here. What is happening here? And he founded the first kind, he discovered the first kind of learning, and that is known as classical conditioning. What is classical conditioning? It is learning by simple association. What is that simple association? I'm pairing two different types of stimuli. The dog started salivating when the food was given, when the food was placed in the mouth of the dog. Now you find there a picture of the food. Food is a natural stimulus, and the natural response to the stimulation is salivation. natural stimulus and a natural response. Now what did Pavlov do? He introduced a bell. Can you imagine? You ring the bell and the dog salivates. This is what Pavlov did. He rang the bell, gave the food, and the dog salivated. So he continued doing this. What did he do? He rang the bell, gave the food, and the dog salivated. So which is the trigger here? The trigger is the bell. The bell is a neutral stimulus. What is a bell? It's a neutral stimulus. A neutral stimulus is a stimulus that does not evoke any response. Does the bell make you salivate? No. Will the bell make the dog salivate? No. It salivates now because just before giving food, Pavlov introduced a bell. The bell, food, the dog started salivating. Look at the next picture. He continued doing this till you just rang the bell, the dog started salivating. This is called classical conditioning. Now there are some things we need to talk here. We need to talk about a neutral stimulus. The bell in the beginning is a neutral stimulus. It does not evoke any response. Then you have an unconditioned, untrained stimulus, a natural stimulus. The natural stimulus over here is food. And what is a natural response? Salivation. Now what is going to happen? Now what did Pavlov do? He rings the bell, gives the food, and salivation continues. So now after many trials, you find that the dog started salivating just when he heard the bell ring. Even if he did not give food, the dog started salivating. So now the dog has learnt a new association between bell and food. So we get back to the earlier transparency. So what is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is learning. It's a simple kind of a learning. It is a simple association between two stimuli. It's the pairing of two stimuli. And because Pavlov was the founder of this conditioning, classical conditioning is also known as Pavlovian conditioning. Do you know of any other name that is given to classical conditioning? It is also known as respondent conditioning. Why is it known as respondent conditioning? It is because the dog salivated. Salivation is a reflex condition. Classical conditioning depends on reflex action, and because it depends on reflex action, it is also known as respondent conditioning. What is a reflex? Who will tell me what is a reflex? It's an impulsive action. Very good. It is present at birth. When you are born, you are presented by nature, by maturation, certain reflex actions. And now this reflex is now associated with a new stimuli. Food, natural responses, salivation. But when I salivate for a bell, it means an unnatural connection has been made, and that is all about classical conditioning. Now we need to know a few concepts that are there in classical conditioning. The first important process under classical conditioning is acquisition. What is acquisition? Acquisition, in simple words, is learning a response or training to a stimulus that occurs through the presentation of an unconditioned stimulus. Acquisition is training, the training that is taking place between food and the bell. Bell, food, salivation. So when this is paired for many times, the bell and the food, there is some sort of association that is taking place. And as that association is taking place, you have the very first process of classical conditioning. We now go on to the second important process of classical conditioning. The second important process is extinction. Extinction is another basic process of classical conditioning. It is the gradual disappearance of the conditioned response. What is this disappearance of conditioned response? Bell, food, salivation. It continues for many trials, up to one trial where I just sound the bell and the dog salivates. Now I continue the same drama. Bell, salivation, bell, salivation, no food. After some time, the dog is tired. Bell, no food. The dog stops salivation. So, what is extinction? The disappearance of salivation to the bell, the gradual disappearance of a conditioned response is known as extinction. The next important concept over here is spontaneous recovery. So, what is spontaneous recovery? The reappearance of an extinguished response after a period without food. The reappearance of salivation after a period of time, even without food, is called as spontaneous recovery.
The period the gap that they take, is it like a short-term period, or experimental basis, do they give it a long gap to see whether after so-and-so days the dog still salivates? In the experiment, did he do it like just the next day, or he took a break?
Now, the schedule is up to me. I can continue, remember, for the disappearance to take place. I may have to give about 30 to 40 trials. I can spread it over days and not give food at all, or I can continue for the whole day. It's up to me. But usually, to give rest for the dog, we space it in a few days. So, for a few days, I ring the bell, I do not give it food, and the dog has stopped salivating. But maybe the next trial or the next day, when I'm sounding the bell, for some reason it reappears, the salivation. The amount may not be so high, but little bit of hope. Yeah, on a basis of hope. You could say hope in human way, but actually the reappearance of salivation after a period where no food was given is known as spontaneous recovery. The next important concept we are going to talk about today is stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization, that's a third basic process. What is stimulus generalization? Let me give you an example. Bell, food, salivation. Now I bring the telephone bell, or I ring the doorbell, or I ring the temple bell, and the dog salivates. I've now generalized my salivation to stimuli that are similar to the bell. That is called stimulus generalization. When I'm giving the same salivation response to the bell, to the church bell, to the temple bell, to the classroom bell, to the telephone bell, if I still give a same response and I still salivate to stimuli that are similar to the original bell, it is known as stimulus generalization. So, what exactly is stimulus generalization? Salivation or conditioned response is given to stimuli that are similar to, but not the same bell, but are similar to the bell. So, Pavlov's dog salivated not only to the original tone, but to other similar tones. And the last concept that I need to discuss with you today is stimulus discrimination. What is stimulus discrimination? When the dog is learning to discriminate between different stimuli. So, I salivate only for the bell, not the church bell, not the temple bell, not the telephone bell, and not any other bells. I salivate, the dog salivates, not I. The dog salivates only to the bell, Pavlov's bell. It is known as stimulus discrimination. be classically conditioned. We are having John B. Watson, who gave little Albert a furry white rat to play, and then suddenly he made a noise. And baby Albert got so frightened that he let the white rat down. And it continued. Every time the rat was given to baby Albert, there was a loud noise. And we all know the basic reflex action for a loud noise. We all experience the startle reflex. And what happened to this poor young boy? He was so frightened of rats. And later, generalization took place. We find that Albert was frightened of every furry white thing. He was frightened of Santa Claus's beard. He was frightened of all white fur coats. He was frightened of the white bunnies. There you find stimulus generalization has taken place. So classical conditioning plays a very important role in our day-to-day lives. All are irrational fears, fears with no logic, no reason. I don't know why I am frightened of spiders. I don't know why I'm frightened of lizards, but I'm so frightened I cannot stay in a room where there are lizards or cockroaches or spiders. Most of the answer is found in the most beautiful topic called classical conditioning.
In human beings, does classical conditioning takes place at childhood level or any age? I mean, any part of life?
Many a times, most of these irrational fears do take place in early childhood when you're emotionally inclined to accept things. You do not think logically. So you find that your brain is still being developed, especially the cerebrum part of it. So you find that most of our irrational fears have their basis in early childhood. But it could even happen in adulthood. For example, if yesterday I was bitten by a dog and I was badly bitten and I have 14 injections here, I'll be very scared of dogs. But if I'm scared only of ulcerations, it is called stimulus discrimination. But if I'm frightened of all types of dogs, it is known as stimulus generalization. And here I need only one trial, one acquisition trial. I don't even need many pairings. I don't need one bite and the dog. Now I look at the dog and I'm frightened because the dog gave me so much of pain. The dog gave me a painful wound and 14 injections. So I just hate dogs.
Ma'am, in the example that you gave, you said bell, food and then the dog, which means
Yes.
the dog was trained to saliva. So does classical conditioning involve training? Because there are some stimuli which generate a natural response in people. So it's very difficult to discriminate, is it trained or is it natural? That if you could
When
just
it is natural, it's a natural stimulus. You're having the unconditioned stimulus and the unconditioned response. Loud noise, I'm frightened. Okay? Food, salivate. I take the pickle and I put it in my mouth starts salivating. Very natural. But if I just say green mango, lime, and if I'm salivating now, that is classical conditioning.
Ma'am, how exactly do we discriminate classical conditioning? Because it comes under learning, that I understood.
Yes.
Talking about the example that you gave, the bell, food and then the dog, in this case it was trained. But if you have to relate to other examples.
You use the right word. You said training. The first period is training or acquisition, where there are constant pairings between a natural stimulus and a neutral stimulus. And then comes a natural response, which later on becomes an unnatural response to the bell. Imagine the dog drooling over the bell. Imagine the dog drooling when he saw Pavlov. Imagine the dog drooling when he saw Pavlov's caretaker or the dog's caretaker. So you find that there is an unnatural connection. You see someone and the dog is drooling. So classical conditioning takes place when a neutral stimulus evokes an unnatural response. So classical conditioning is the basis of most and many forms of learning behavior in humans as well as in animals.
When you are in the childhood, that time you have some fear to few things like spiders or water.
Yeah.
So does it relate to phobia in any way?
One view of looking at phobias is that they are conditioned emotional responses. When I am emotional, there are certain changes that take place inside my body. I look at something, I get frightened, and there are certain autonomic nervous system changes that take place. So now I just look at some neutral stimuli and build about a relationship, and that is why I go to a high place, I get frightened. Or if I see some unusual being, I get frightened. Or sometimes even as simple as pollen. The pollen from the flowers makes me just sneeze. Why does it make me sneeze? There was a case where one of our students fell into the garden where there was a lot of golden rods, and these golden rods had lot of pollen, and she started sneezing, which is very natural. When pollen falls on your nose, there is a chance that you're going to sneeze. But 5 years down the line, 8 years ago, this girl's birthday party was going on, when suddenly there comes her friend with a big bunch of flowers, and those flowers 8 years ago had lot of golden rods. And as soon as this girl came with the golden rod, she saw her friend with the golden rod bouquet, this student of mine started sneezing. So it's an unnatural, the sight is enough to make her sneeze. So the sight has now become, it's an unnatural stimulus now, bringing an unnatural, it's a natural stimulus bringing an unnatural response. So there is classical conditioning. So with this we conclude our topic on what is learning. Now who could tell me what is learning? Shall we sum up our chapter and say what is learning?
Learning is a relatively permanent change.
Very, very good. It is, please remember, learning is a permanent change, relatively permanent change. It's not a temporary change, and it is a result of past experience. Excellent, it's a result of past experience. And today we learnt one of the first forms of learning, and that is called classical conditioning.